And a very good morning, everybody. I'm so glad that you are all joining us. Forgive me, my mic was off. So I'm going to go back to the slide in which we introduced the session so that we can all be on the same page. Types of investigations is what we will be looking at today. And again, I want to remind you, all of us actually, that the module is not intended to prepare or equip us to work as forensic laboratory assistants. It is designed to lay a foundational skill set for investigative work within the corporate, private, and public service. This may mean that you could be working in a police environment or at a parastatal like ESCOM or even SARS, or something like Vodacom or Cell C as a forensic investigator, or at an insurance company. Or you could even start your own investigation company, thus be a private investigator. Be reminded also that this module is the foundation. Once you are done with this module, you will not yet be able to do all these things. You will require some on-the-job training and coaching or mentoring. So before we proceed, let's warm up our brains and consider the following questions. What has a face but cannot smile? If you can put your answers in the chat box. And yes, it is a clock. If you answered a clock, you would be correct. Our next question is, there is only one word spelled wrong in the dictionary. What is this word? Ah, Abigail, you are totally right. It is the word wrong. And our last question, what goes up but never comes down? What goes up but never comes down? Your age, Abigail, you are acing it this morning. Okay,
Wow.
She's awesome.
Excellent. She did my
Excellent.
IQ.
Okay, so now that our brains have been warmed up, let us consider our expectations. What do we expect to learn from the session today? I want to invite you to take your notebooks and write down the following questions. What do we expect to learn from the session today? What do we expect to learn from life today? And what do we expect to learn from the module FOR1502 when we are done with the entire semester? So I'm going to give us all a moment to just write down those 3 questions. We will come back to them after the session and we will touch on them during the course of the semester. The answers to some of these questions we're going to look at today, and I'm going to invite everybody please to use the chat box for this. If you are not comfortable to share your answers in the chat box, just write them down somewhere safe for yourself in your study notes or a notebook. But then we need to do something with it. I want to give us each a few moments to think about these questions, to really ask ourselves, we have embarked on this journey of learning. But why? What is the purpose and what is it that we want to achieve? Firstly, by looking at the session today, what is it that I want to understand today? What am I expecting from my lesson today? Outside the lesson, what am I expecting to learn from life today? And the last question, what do we expect to learn from the module FOR1502 when we are done with the entire semester? We will try to measure our progress as we proceed through the semester. Our expectations of each lesson should help us achieve this. Take note of the our and the we. I include myself in this because I too want to learn, and I can learn from all of you, and so can Dr. Machetti, who is my secondary lecturer. And we want to learn from all of you, not necessarily always discipline-specific matters, but Through your views and opinions and questions, we are also able to learn. Having considered our expectations, let us look at what it is we are going to focus on in the lesson today. Stephen Covey refers to in the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People that we are to begin with the end in mind. Where are we headed after we have concluded the session? This lesson does not cover specific study units because the content overlaps. So the lesson's content will overlap between several study units. I do this purposefully because I've noticed from previous semesters that students think that the study units are mutually exclusive. In other words, that they are unrelated to each other. And that is not true. They actually overlap and they are very much, there's a synergy between the different units. So our first outcome is to understand the different types of investigations, criminal, civil, and disciplinary, and why they are done. And then number 2, to understand the difference between law and policy. Policy then meaning company rules and procedures. Now, society is governed by rules and laws. If you do not know what the rules are, how can you follow them? Therefore, it is vital that we first know the rules before we can follow them. If we want to be able to follow the rules, then somebody must inform us what the rules are. At UNISA, we have given you all the different policies and codes, and those are the rules for students to follow in an academic environment. I cannot call you out for doing something that is not contained in the rules. However, having said that, it is impossible to have rules and laws for each and every situation in life. As life evolves, so do the rules and laws. Broadly, the rules I refer to are law and company policy. Knowing them will help me to color inside the lines. There are thus rules and there are laws. Rules are more informal, but there are consequences when we break the rules. You can be charged under the disciplinary code of your company if you do not abide by the rules, but those rules may only apply to employees of that company. It may not apply to your life partner who works at another company or a Mr. D person entering the premises of your company. Non-compliance with the policies of a company may only amount to a disciplinary transgression, but sometimes it may also constitute a criminal offense. Non-compliance with the law is always a criminal offense. Laws are that which is contained in either common law or statutory law. Breaking the law always has dire consequences, and one will always get into trouble when one breaks the law. In our modules, we are discussing 2 sets of rules, in inverted commas. The first set is called law, and the second set is called policy. You would have read by now in the study guide that South Africa is a constitutional democracy. This means that the Constitution of South Africa is the highest law of the land. It also implies that we are bound to adhere to the rule of law and that no person is above the law, close quote. Now, the rule of law is, open quote, a principle of governance in which all persons, institutions, and entities, public or private, including the state itself, are accountable to laws that are publicly promulgated, equally enforced, and independently adjudicated, and which are consistent with international human rights norms and standards, close quote. Thus, for the purpose of our discussion today, the law I'm going to refer to is either common law or statutory law. We do address customary law briefly in the study guide, but we will not be addressing it here. So it does not matter where you live in South Africa, the law applies to all of us. Company policy, on the other hand, is the second set of rules, and this puts in place how an employer may or may not act, also how the employee should or should not act. So in other words, how UNISA should conduct itself towards me and how I should conduct myself within the UNISA space. The Labour Relations Act frames this interaction. Companies are expected to design policies so that everyone knows what is acceptable behavior and what is considered as misconduct. All policy designed to set standards for a company must adhere to that which is legally binding in our law. Thus, while some policies are not directly linked to legislation, others are, such as the Employment Equity Act that frames the recruitment and appointment of people within a company, for example. But if I resign from company A and I go and work for company B, there will be a different set of policies, but their principles should be the same. Thus, company policy stops having an impact on me as an individual once I leave the company. The contract that the company lets me sign should make this clear. When you hear the term justice, what images come to mind? Now, study unit 0 forms the foundation to our module, and it takes the focus of the module out of the Western paradigm and it situates it into the African epistemology. What I mean by this is that if you thought that Europeans brought justice and order to Africa, we would be wrong. There is strong evidence of the existence of social order and groups and components within tribes and regions which were established to maintain order and also to address the situation if there was disorder. So knowing that justice and order is not a Western concept is our starting point. In study unit 0, we briefly look at social justice, alternative dispute resolution, and restorative justice, as well as the African philosophy of Ubuntu. I know that this is not a political philosophy module, but these principles are vital as we work through the learning material, and we are encouraged to consider and discuss alternative avenues of meting out justice in inverted commas to those options already at our disposal. Who knows, we might even end up changing things within our spaces of influence. Now that we have a foundation for our discussion, let's proceed with the rest of the discussion. I used the term coloring inside the lines, and this basically means that we stay within the boundaries set. So from the image above, you can clearly see the different shades of yellow, pink, green, and blue. But in the image below, the lines have blurred and one is not sure of the purity of the colors. Now, how does this relate to our lesson? Well, since society is governed by rules and laws, it means that members of society, we are expected to conduct ourselves in a specific way. The government have put in place laws that tell us what is acceptable and what's not. We will also then distinguish between disciplinary offences and transgressions and criminal offences. These are the two primary types of offences and thus investigations that we will be looking at in this module. Our module consists of 13 study units placed in two separate sections of the study guide, Section 1 and Section 2. In Section 1, we will deal with disciplinary offences, and Section 2, we will deal with criminal offences. And I'm going to ask you to take a moment to just consider those different themes. Now that we've considered the different themes, let's proceed. The three broad categories of investigations are criminal investigation, civil investigation, or disciplinary investigation, and then investigation for information only. Which one is eventually embarked on depends on what is it that needs to be proven. And this is an important question to ask because the quality and standards for evidence in these categories are different. So let's consider these categories relevant to the module only, and that will be the first two. So we're going to look at criminal investigations and then civil or disciplinary investigations. In the module FOR 2608 and 2607, you touch on doing the intelligence profile or the background check. So let's begin with the end in mind. If a crime has been committed, in other words, an existing law has been broken, then a criminal investigation is to be done. Now, it's important to understand that before a crime can be considered a crime, before a conduct can be considered a criminal offense, that conduct must first be captured on the record or in formal legislation. So it's called the nullum crimen sine lege theory, the principle of legality. In other words, before you can be charged with something, there must be a formal record that says that this something is not considered lawful or legal. We want to find the truth and arrest the perpetrator so that they can have their day in court to answer the allegations set against them. So, successful prosecution of the offender is what we want to do. Crimes are traditionally reported to the police, who must then conduct a comprehensive investigation into the matter. They are obliged by law to investigate all crimes reported to them as well as possible. But for many years now, others have started to also conduct criminal investigations. It's vital to note that criminal offences are not only investigated by the SAPS. There are quite a number of government agencies who conduct criminal investigations, but this is mandated by specific pieces of legislation, and those organizations may only work within that framework. Here we can refer to the Special Investigation Unit, the military police, and even the environmental management inspectors who work for the Department of Environmental Affairs. In addition, there are several audit firms and many investigative agencies or companies that offer their services to conduct criminal investigations and then to provide the completed investigation to either the SAPS for the prosecution phase or even to the company that hired them. Often this is where either a private or a forensic investigator is contracted with a specific mandate to conduct a specific investigations. Such investigations do not necessarily end up being prosecuted as a criminal matter. Some companies use the evidence gathered to either address the matter at a civil level, or they may even consider to go the disciplinary route. In the criminal investigative space, the burden of proof is with the one who makes the allegation. So he who alleges must prove. So it is the state that is alleging that I stole something. So the state must prove in a court of law that I did steal. And the measure of the evidence is beyond reasonable doubt. They must prove beyond reasonable doubt, not all doubt, but beyond reasonable doubt. If the rules of a company, however, are transgressed and not complied with, then a disciplinary investigation may be done. Similarly, an investigation is done to find the truth so that a decision can be made depending on the policy guiding the company rules. Remember, not all disciplinary offences should be investigated. Those transgressions viewed as minor should not be investigated. It is a waste of resources. And yet company policy will frame or should frame what is considered as a minor offence, a serious misconduct, or very serious misconduct. For such investigations, most companies have their own in-house investigators. They're called by various names. two names we are familiar with are forensic investigator and a corporate investigator. The companies who do not have their own in-house investigative capacity usually outsource these investigations to private companies who specialize in this, or even private detectives. But what if a company wants to hire a specific person, but they first want to find out more about that person? Then they usually task or hire an investigator to compile an intelligence profile or do a background check. This is the third type of investigation. I'm just mentioning it here, but we do not deal with it in this module. I just want to touch briefly on it quickly. The last category of the investigation is aimed at just gathering information or intelligence on a person or on something. So if your company wants to hire a specific person, but they first want to find out more about them, then they usually hire an investigator to do a background check. And this is very important to get as much information about this person as possible before companies hire such people. But as I say, we will not deal with this type of category in our module. So to recap, two types of categories of investigation: criminal investigation and civil or disciplinary investigation. The first one is framed by law, and the second one is framed by corporate policy or company rules. The first one is usually undertaken by the South African police, but there are also other government departments and other role players that have that are sometimes tasked to undertake criminal investigations. But then this is usually within a very strict mandate or legislation. And then the last category is where your corporate or your forensic or private investigator does an investigation within the context of the company, once again also framed by a very specific mandate or a letter of intent that tells you investigate person A for allegations of, let's say, absenteeism or theft of company property or misuse of company property. So let's go back to where we started to see where it is that we want to end. Take a quick moment and ask yourself the following. How well do you now understand the different types of investigation, criminal and civil or disciplinary? And what is it that perhaps we need to understand or to refine better? Do we understand why these investigations are done? And do we now better understand the difference between law, be it common law or statutory law, and policy, which is usually your company rules and procedures? Now, sometimes people do things in error, and they will say, I'm sorry, it was a mistake. Now, anyone who has never made a mistake simply does not live. We all make mistakes. But the important thing is that we need to learn from our mistakes. And how does one show that you've learned from a mistake? Is you simply do not repeat it. So I've included here a quote from Pinterest that says, if you make a mistake once, it is called a mistake. Making that same mistake a second time is called a decision. So in a workspace, when an employee makes a mistake and the line manager reprimands that person, that the offending employee, if they were to make that same mistake again, to what extent can that be called a mistake or a decision? And that's often sometimes some things we get faced with in a corporate or a company setting. Now, this brings us to the end of our lesson for today. I'm going to go to the floor and I'm going to invite our class to raise their hands if there are any questions that they want to ask, or to pop the questions for me into the chat. Any questions? Okay, if there are no questions, I'm going to insert into the chat a quick survey of the lessons that a lesson I just designed. If I can find the survey so that we can gather from the floor. Thank you, Dr. Machete, so that we can gather from the floor how beneficial you found today's session and what other things you would like us to present on the next time. So if you could just give me a moment, I'm going to find my my template. I'm going to stop sharing and I'm also going to stop the recording.